Hi, my name is Finn,
Hi, my name is Tova.
and today we're talking about
Period dramas or historical dramas.
welcome. I always have such a hard time starting because I feel like I jump in and I'm like, oh, we pause for the title card, and then I think, oh, how do I land this plane? How do I seamlessly go right into the show? But I guess welcoming the person isn't a bad way. How are you doing? How was your day?
I'm doing good. I'm really glad to be here because I've been looking forward to this for like a month.
Oh, good.
Because I just love to talk about this kind of stuff and it's fun to hang out with you.
Yeah, well, I think we can start a little bit by I'd like to know, well, I know, but for the folks at home, where are you from and you go to Western? What are you up to at Western?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Eastern Washington, from Okanagan County, but I've been at Western Bellingham for the last 5 years. I study history and I have a minor in political science, which I think really relates to why I like period dramas, because it's like the perfect mix of history and there's always a lot of politics, or at least the ones I like to watch.
Right.
So it's like, this is literally what I do academically, but it's also what I do for fun.
Right, yeah. I'm also super interested in the history of politics, and I am also a really big sucker for period dramas, so I'm hoping to get some recommendations today. But we met through Model UN, so we have a lot of interest overlap in that sense. I'm also studying history and political science, so
Shocking why we're friends.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it worked out. It's just a fluke. I know you have a lot to talk about, so I feel like we should just jump into it. Who's on your shirt, Tova?
Yeah, so my shirt is this interesting fan art of a portrait of Charles V of Spain, or he's Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, which is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire,
Right.
as Voltaire says. He's also known as Charles I of Spain. He was a bunch of things. He was a very weird man, I think is a nice way to put it. He is a Habsburg, so he's known for his iconic jawline, and he is probably currently one of my favorite historical figures. I kind of go through phases, but I do like attaching to particular figures and then just learning a lot about them and investing myself in their story.
So you said that he's Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, which is essential for those who don't know. It's essentially the precursor to modern Germany, in the sense that it was a collection of many German states that were anywhere from pretty big to the size of a medium-sized neighborhood. I mean, there were dozens, if not hundreds, of little constituencies that were part of this so-called the Holy Roman Empire, which really was not, as you kind of mentioned, is not centralized in any way, but did have a figurehead emperor at the top of it. But you said, so he is Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, so he was a Holy Roman Emperor, but he was Charles I of Spain, so he was also a king of Spain. So how did that happen? I guess, where is he from originally, and how did he and also the Habsburgs become, spread across Europe and be able to hold multiple positions of power in Europe simultaneously?
Yeah, so Charles, let's see, what's the simplest way to explain this? Charles is the son of, what is his name? Philip the Handsome Habsburg. Was he handsome? Nobody really knows. I don't think his portrait is particularly handsome, but that's his nickname for the time.
We should mention this is in the 1400s, 1500s.
Yeah. And he was the son of Maximilian, who was the Holy Roman Emperor before Charles. And Charles's mother was Joanna or Juana of Castile, the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, the Catholic monarchs.
Right.
And she was known as Juana la Loca, or Juana the Crazy, because supposedly she was mentally ill, but that kind of plays into something I'll talk about in a minute. But essentially, Juana and Philip were married, and Juana was never supposed to be like anyone really important in the Kingdom of Spain. But then her older brother died, and her sister, who was Catherine of Aragon, who married, King Henry VIII, I think she was older than Catherine, but their brother John died, and so after Isabella's death, Juana became the Queen of Spain, and Charles was her oldest son, and that ensued a lot of drama between Juana and her husband Philip and her father Ferdinand, and they both didn't think that Juana should be the Queen of Spain, and so they tried to kind of undermine her and called her crazy. So we don't actually know if she was crazy or not. That literally could just be the men in her life trying to
Right.
steal her power.
Right, and of course we don't have good independent attestations and records about these people in a lot of cases, so narratives can be spun and propagated about these people that then become history isn't the right word, but they become attached to their image in a historical way. Is that
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. And so through being like a regent of his mother, Charles became the King of Spain, and then his father, Philip the Handsome, died in like 1506, I think, before Maximilian died, and so then he also became the emperor through ascending or taking over from his grandfather.
So kind of a he got pretty lucky in terms of things through, it sounds like a lot of coincidence, just kind of lining up for him in terms of where he was in line for the throne. So then he gained these two positions through that.
Which is, I think it's one of the like kind of weird things. Like, I know that none of these people could have foreseen like all of these like circumstances happening.
Right.
But based on like how much of an issue Ferdinand seemed to have with like the Habsburgs like taking over Spain, why did he marry his son to like one of the children? Like, if you don't want them to take over, don't marry them.
And so the Habsburgs they're still, like we were saying before the show, they're actually still around. They're not on the throne anywhere, but they're a wealthy family. They might go by a different name now, but they're it's still the same family. But the Habsburgs are Austrian, right? And they deliberately married and intermarried in order to consolidate their own power and gain control of countries in Europe. Is that
Yeah.
how you describe it?
I think they also have a lot of connections to like Burgundy in France, Flanders, which is like roughly Belgium, but it's also like the
Part
Netherlands.
of Belgium, yeah, a region.
It's really confusing. I just kind of think of it as like, the lowlands of like the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Benelux, essentially.
Well, this is, of course, before any of those countries had emerged as independent entities, but
that makes it kind of like complicated to like say where they're from.
Right, exactly.
But I do think that's one of the curious things is like Charles, he was never born in Spain. And so he didn't come to Spain until he was like 16 or 17 years old and became the king. And that was like, I don't know how historically accurate this is because a lot of my knowledge from this is coming from period dramas, a specific period drama. But then he was like kind of seen as a foreigner, but then he was still like became the king of that region. And I think also because of like the kind of idea of the Holy Roman Empire, it's not really connected to one specific place. And so that allows for this really like what's the right word? I'm going to say androgynous. That might not be quite the word that I'm looking for. Connection to just, all of these different places. And I think it also allowed them to kind of spread their power. And that's, they're all over Europe. And I mean, that's just royalty in general, especially European royalty.
Yeah. Well, people forget that the British royal family is actually German. The House of Windsor was renamed to the House of Windsor, I believe, either during or I think the lead up to World War One, from the House of Hanover, because the kings and queens of Great Britain and later the United Kingdom were at the same time the electors of Hanover in Germany, which is part of the Holy Roman Empire, because of a complicated agreement dating back to the maybe even before the 1700s. But like Elizabeth II, Charles III, those guys are all descended from German monarchs. So they're like even the most famous national royal family, like the British royal family, is so tied to the identity of that country, but they're not. That family does not originate in Great Britain or the United Kingdom. Now, does that make them not British? No, it doesn't really matter that much. I don't think so. But it's an example of what you were saying, how these royal families were from lots of different places and then would ascend to the throne in various countries that they themselves or their parents might not have been from, but through politics and marriages and stuff.
Yeah, and Charles, he also technically ruled over the Kingdom of Naples. The Kingdom of Naples in Italy confuses me so much because it is constantly kind of under the supervision of people that you would not really consider Italian.
Yeah.
In historical, I mean, obviously Italy didn't become unified until the 1800s. So
yeah,
the word
There's
Italian
under
is
the thumb of Spain for a long time, and then France. And then,
it's super super chaotic, and then you have through Charles kind of ruled over Spain through a viceroy. And the Spanish viceroy of Naples, and you're like, this is so confusing. I can't keep track of who's in charge.
Right. But, kind of a web of a chain of command.
Yeah.
Well, it also really shows how different we think of countries now versus, I mean, we both did Model UN, and that the idea that, I mean, you kind of have it where, Charles III is also the King of Canada, but he does not rule over Canada in any meaningful way, and has not for a long, long time. And so besides that, I would say pretty minor exception, where even though the United Kingdom and Canada share a king, they're in every imaginable way two separate countries. But besides that, the idea of kind of the relationship that we're describing, where you have different countries like Naples and Spain and the Holy Roman Empire are controlled by one guy who is simultaneously, the head of state of all three, and plus more.
Yeah. He's everything.
Yeah, I mean, it really changes. It's just a very different way of looking at what a national identity is. Do you agree? Do you agree with that?
I really enjoy, one thing I enjoy about period dramas is the politics of it. Because as a friend once pointed out to me, period dramas are a lot of talking, which I was like, that's so true. And nothing makes you realize that more than watching a period drama in a language that you don't really speak, but we'll get to that in a minute. There's a lot of, political maneuvering, and I especially like to watch period dramas that are set in the kind of the Renaissance era, the 1500s. That's my jam. I have so many recommendations from that era. And having an understanding of modern politics helps make those kinds of, shows more interesting to watch. I took a British Parliament class, or the British Parliament class at Western, and to understand how that works, I can be watching period dramas set in like, and pretty much anywhere in British history. And I was like, oh, I understand how this works because I understand
Right.
the concept of it. And but it enriches my experience in academically and, in just the entertainment that
To
I'm
make
watching.
the connections to history. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I would love to. You kind of have hinted at it. What have you brought? What have you brought with you today?
Yeah, so I don't know how to even begin to describe what this item is. It's a DVD, but it's also a book. And this is for my current show that I'm watching, which is Carlos Rey Emperado, which translates to Charles King Emperor. So this is Charles V. He does not look anything like the art on my shirt. But that's probably my one complaint about it, is that Charles does not look anything like Charles. However,
Right.
I do really like this actor, Alvaro Cervantes, I think is how you would say his name. This is a Spanish show. It is entirely in Spanish, produced by the national Spanish television. I do not speak Spanish. Or I speak a minimal amount of Spanish.
Very, very briefly, did Charles speak Spanish? Charles V?
He probably spoke some Spanish.
Right. But he was probably mainly German speaker?
Yeah, he probably mostly spoke German, Latin, as everyone did.
Oh, right.
Probably also spoke Italian. There's this saying
Sure.
that I don't know exactly the origin of it, but he says he spoke Latin to God, Italian to
yes.
women,
Yes, I know
German
this
to his
quote.
horse or whatever.
Turn to this horse. Yeah, that's a good quote. I remember this.
That may or may not be actually a quote from him, but he was multilingual.
Sure. Well, so the show's in Spanish.
The show is in
so
Spanish.
Tell us about it. Maybe through opening the book or
Yeah,
however you want to
let's
do it.
see. I think the best way. This
Is
is
it
my favorite part of this.
The characters.
The book is the DVD case. So these are kind of the 6 main characters. We have Charles. We have King Francis of France, or Francisco as he's known in this show. Hernan Cortez, yes, the famous conquistador. We have his son Philip II, or Felipe. Then we have King Henry VIII, or Enrique VIII. And then Maria of Portugal, who is his most famous wife. And it kind of, follows Charles throughout his life, starting at about 1516 when he comes to Spain for the first time, and through his death in 1558, I believe, and the kind of overarching politics and drama and insanity that kind of characterize his reign. The other kind of main character is the King of France, Francis, who was his brother-in-law through his sister. And they were also kind of enemies, so that makes it an interesting dynamic. And then obviously these other kind of storylines and characters weave through. I haven't actually got to the part where Henry comes in, and I'm curious how that weaves in, because I have watched so many different shows about King Henry VIII. He is, I'm gonna say, I think he's the most iconic kind of king in lay history. Everyone knows who he is.
Right.
And
It's very
I'm
famous.
really curious to see how he's going to be portrayed.
Oh, so you haven't gotten that far.
Yeah, I haven't. In a Spanish show where he's not supposed to quote unquote be the good guy. Not that he's necessarily a villain, but he was married to Charles's aunt, Catherine of Aragon, and he displaced her for Anne Boleyn.
And I don't remember how exactly I don't know how the Spanish reacted to this. I'm not educated on the history, but of course he splits England away from the Catholic Church. And obviously Spain, famously, still deeply Catholic. And the Holy Roman Empire was also.
And Charles has a very specific connection to the Catholic Church. I mean, obviously he was raised very Catholic, and his mom especially. But he was crowned emperor by the Pope.
Right.
And that was something
Right.
that after him like stopped for some reason.
Really? Because I thought like Napoleon.
Yeah. Napoleon wasn't really like Holy Roman Emperor.
No, he wasn't. But you mean specifically for the Holy Roman
Yeah.
Empire? Oh, okay.
I was like, yeah. I mean, there was other people who
Right. No, I
were
see what you mean.
crowned.
I see what you mean.
But
Yeah, Napoleon destroyed the Holy Roman Empire.
yeah.
But yeah. Yes.
And so he was like the last one who was like crowned by the Pope, kind of
Gotcha.
bringing this connection to Charlemagne, who is, I mean, he wasn't technically part of the Holy Roman Empire. That was something that kind of came later, but he was essentially the genesis of it.
Yeah, the precursor.
The precursor. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So that's why he's Charles V. Like there have been 4 other Charleses since Charlemagne to get
Oh, so
to him.
Charlemagne is Charles the First, so
Yeah.
to speak. Okay, interesting. Interesting.
I mean, no one knows him as that, but
Right.
that's where you get the
That's
count.
I didn't know that though. That's interesting, but it makes sense. I guess.
Yeah.
It's Charlemagne, Charles
the Great.
Magna Great. Oh, that's cool. I just made that connection. That's fun. Anyway.
It is more fun to say Charlemagne, I do admit.
Right.
Or Charlemagna, as I like to pronounce it.
Charlemagne. Yeah.
Which is,
Anyway, but are you enjoying the show?
I am. It's fun. I understand about 15% of what's going on.
You have subtitles, I assume.
I have subtitles in Spanish.
You don't have subtitles in English?
There are no subtitles in English.
Oh, okay. So you're just muddling through.
I do love to commit to a good bit. And this goes back to kind of my origin in watching period dramas. I think I got into them when I was like 15, and my friend introduced me to a Turkish period drama called Magnificent Century, which is about Suleiman the Magnificent. And I watched the first couple of episodes. They had like English subtitles, and then they like stopped subtitling them for whatever reason, and I continued to watch it.
I've watched a couple of period dramas or historical shows with foreign language and with subtitles. One was the movie Downfall, which is a fantastic movie. It's where the meme of Hitler freaking out is in his bunker, like him pounding the table and stuff. That movie is where it's from, but it's a great. I mean, don't let the meme stop. Like, it's an amazing movie, very good. And the other movie that it's called Admiral, or Mikhail de Reuter. I think I've told you about it. It's about a Dutch admiral around this time. Well, no, later in the 1600s. But about an admiral who basically his involvement in a series of wars that the Netherlands has with like the England and France and blah blah blah. It's pretty good. It's not all in Dutch. It's each character speaks in their own language. So when you have Dutch people, they're speaking Dutch, and then when they cut to England, they're all speaking English. It's kind of cool. But other than that,
It's cool that you mentioned that, because I think one of the funniest things about the show to me is that even in the like French storyline, when they're in France and all of the characters are quote unquote French, they're speaking Spanish, and that's so like weird for my brain, because like obviously I've watched plenty of shows in English or that are like British productions where they'll be in France and everyone's speaking English. But it's less weird when I'm only going through like one layer of like language. But when I'm going through, I was like, oh, I'm listening/reading this in Spanish, trying to translate into English, and then conceptually thinking of that they're actually should be speaking French. It's
a few layers there.
It's wild. And I kind of love that. Also, there's one story that I really do want to tell. It's kind of related to this, but
Sure.
but sometimes like people will ask me like, what is a period drama?
Yeah.
Because not
There's
everyone
kind of
knows.
Can be a blurry line there.
And The story is that someone very close to me thought that a period drama was a drama about people on their period. And I got the permission to tell this, so I'm not like throwing them under the bus. But you know, I was like, that is a really fair, like, thing to assume. Like, you're like, period. That's kind of vague.
Combine the two. I mean, yeah.
Like, I see where you're going, and period dramas are very dramatic. So, like,
Sure.
I see the thought process, and I love that story. I have this person who told the story has watched a lot of period dramas since, and definitely knows the difference.
The premise.
the premise of it. But it got me thinking a lot about, like, how would I define what a period drama is? And to me, it's a drama that takes place in a usually historical period, but where the period is very pertinent to the plot line and who the characters are.
Sure.
But it's like, there are some, like, quote unquote modern period dramas, like The Crown. It goes all the way into like 2005, you know, about Queen Elizabeth. But, you know, it starts off in like the 50s, and the time period of it is very crucial to kind of understanding the story.
Would you say it's a kind of story, it's a story that, like, could not happen outside of the time that it is intended?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
And by the way, that excluding things like movies from the 80s where the plot line wouldn't happen if people had cell phones, like, not that.
Yeah.
But, like, the plot line is dependent on the whatever political, cultural, whatever reality of the time period it's set in.
Yeah, and like to think that most period dramas, like, take place before like 1960, like stuff onward is a little bit like, it's not too recent, but stuff is changing and the world has become so much globalized, and I feel like those factors that I often really associate with period dramas become less pertinent. Like, I can't think of, I'm trying to think. Like, there's a lot of shows now that, while they do come across as kind of dated based on, like, the technology or, you know, the references, like, I could make that movie 10 years in the future and it would still probably work.
Yeah.
Like, the references and certain things would be different, but it wouldn't be like, oh, this would feel really weird if it didn't take place in 2005.
Right. I mean, there are, I'm hoping for more period dramas of more recent, like, I would love in like 20 years, 20 or 30, 20, 25 years to see a long form, if it's a mini series or a movie, I'm part of it, but just about like the last 10 years of American political history. Or just this year.
The last 3 weeks.
The last 3 weeks of American political history. For, you know, this won't be out for a month. So when we're filming this, Joe Biden dropped out of the race like 2 days ago, or 4 days ago. So that's context for why we said that. But I would, there's so much interesting stuff, not even just this year, but like, there's so much interesting stuff that has happened recently that is way too recent to make media like a drama about now, because it would just be weird and off-putting probably. But I think there's a lot to explore. I think there's a lot of themes and things to explore.
Yeah. I realized, you know, the more that I think about like what kind of period dramas I do watch, I was like, all of them I feel like are like pre like 1800. I really love that time period in history, and I guess that also relates to when people ask me like, what is your like period of history that you're interested in? I'm like, I say it's usually about 1200 to like 1900, or maybe like the 1950s. I don't know. So sometimes I enjoy some World War II, World War I history. But I really focus more on that kind of like older type of period dramas that take place earlier, because it just feels much more like an escapism to me, and I really love that in my media. I was like, I want to be immersed in something that is different than what it is, or than like what I'm experiencing in like the world.
Right.
But then also I do love how, because of, you know, politics and just the nature of humanity, that I can still find a lot of things that I could really relate to in these period dramas, even though I was like, I am not a 15th century princess in Italy or
Right.
Spain or
There's still
whatever.
like human themes that we can relate to.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, but before I go to the last question, I would love to get like maybe a rapid fire recommendations from you on period dramas or historical shows or movies that you think are high quality and that people would enjoy, or that you've enjoyed. What are like maybe five?
Okay.
Five.
One of my favorite ones, which this kind of got a little bit usurped by, you know, this Carlos show, because that's my current obsession. But I love the show Medici. It was on Netflix. It is no longer on Netflix. I have all the DVDs though, because that's how much I liked it. It's a dual British Italian production. So it's, you know, everyone in it is British basically. But I think it's a really fun and decently historically accurate look at the Renaissance banking turned ducal family, which I'm obsessed with the Medici. I think they're super fascinating. Also kind of connected to that, there's The Serpent Queen, which is on Starz, which is about Catherine de' Medici, and her rise to being the Queen of France. It also features Charles V in a cameo role, and he's played by the guy who voices Prince Charming in Shrek, which is such...
That's a good cast. That's fun.
It's such a random like connection, but like as a 2000s kid, I love that so much. It's a really good show, really fun, and I think it does a really good job of intermixing like French history, but also making it fun to like a modern audience. And it's also pretty diverse. Like they did a lot of diverse casting and things that I appreciate in a more modern sense. Also, if you like Tudor history or the Tudor era, King Henry VIII, there's a really great kind of connected series of shows also by Starz, The White Queen, White Princess, and The Spanish Princess, which go from the York King, King Edward, through Henry VII and Henry VIII, and it's very dramatic, very fun, great costumes. And also, if you like good costume dramas, I would be remiss to kind of not recommend the original period drama that got me into this, Magnificent Century, which is, you know, a Turkish period drama about Suleiman the Magnificent.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, those are some good recommendations. I know you've talked about The Serpent Queen a lot. Well, not the last time we met, but like when we got the idea to do this episode, and I think I'll probably watch it sooner rather than later. It sounds really interesting and well done. But just to wrap us up here, what are you looking forward to?
So many things. I think the biggest thing right now is that I am going to be studying abroad in Italy for a semester this fall. Fingers crossed that a couple of other things go through. And I'm excited about this because I love the Renaissance, as I've kind of established with a lot of the shows that I've watched. And to be able to like go and be in like the center of where this all takes place. Florence is the birthplace of the Renaissance. And so all of these cool things from all of these shows that I love, I'm going to be able to experience and like physically be in these places. And I'm just really excited to have that opportunity to just live out my nerd dreams. And also, you know, get to study abroad, which is something that I've wanted to do since I got to Western.
That's awesome. That's so exciting. You have to send me pictures and visit some Medici historical sites. But it's super cool. I'm super excited for you.
And I will be posting all about it on my social media. I might even do some stuff on my blog. So, yeah.
Big things on the way.
Big things.
Super exciting.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Tova. That was great.
So it was really fun. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye, everyone.